The restaurant lights shimmered like stars that had fallen to bless the night. Laughter filled the air, plates clinking, music humming, waiters moving around with trays of steaming food. It was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. My graduation dinner. The night my family would finally be proud of me. I had worked for this moment through sleepless nights, part-time jobs, and endless prayers. I stood, my heart full and trembling. To my parents, I began, raising my glass. For every sacrifice you made so I could stand here today, thank you. Applause echoed around the table. Aunties smiled, uncles nodded proudly. My younger cousins giggled as they clapped. I turned to look at my mother, hoping to see that one thing I had always wanted from her, a smile of pride. But instead, she stared at me with the same cold eyes that had followed me all my life. No emotion. No joy. Just a frozen glare that made my voice falter. I tried to push through the discomfort, forcing a laugh. I wouldn't be here without your prayers and your love. Then it happened. Her voice sliced through the air like a knife. We wish you were never born. For a moment, the entire room stopped breathing. Even the music seemed to die mid-beat. I stood there, my glass still in my hand, not sure if I heard her right. Maybe I imagined it, maybe it was the noise. But she repeated it slower this time, each word heavier than the last. We wish you were never born. A chill ran down my spine. The laughter faded into whispers. My father lowered his head, saying nothing, his silence screaming louder than any word he could have spoken. My aunt gasped softly. Someone dropped a fork. I felt every eye on me, pity, confusion, judgment. I wanted to melt into the floor. My heart was pounding so loud that I could barely hear my own breath. My hands shook. Mama, why would you say that? I whispered, my throat tightening. She leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into something between anger and regret. You think you made us proud. You have brought nothing but shame. That was it. The last thread of hope inside me snapped. I placed the glass down gently, though my fingers were trembling. My chest felt heavy, like the room itself was pressing down on me. Without another word, I turned and walked out. The door swung shut behind me, cutting off the murmurs and the clinking of plates outside. The night air hit me like ice. The sound of cars on the street felt distant, unreal. My eyes burned, but no tears came. I just stood there, staring into the darkness, hearing her words echo again and again in my mind. We wish you were never born. And in that single sentence, my whole life cracked open. I don't remember how long I stood outside that restaurant. The night air was thick with the smell of rain, but I couldn't feel anything. My heart had gone numb. Cars passed by, their headlights flashing over my face. And I just stood there, a graduate in a neat black suit, holding a certificate that suddenly meant nothing. It's strange how one sentence can erase years of effort. We wish you were never born. The words circled in my head like a cruel song, and with every repetition, they dug deeper into my soul. I started walking aimlessly down the street, my shoes clicking on the wet pavement. The city lights blurred through my tears. I tried to understand why my mother hated me so much. What did I ever do that was so unforgivable? When I was little, I thought maybe if I brought home good grades, she would smile. If I cleaned the house without being told, she'd say thank you. If I said I love you, she'd finally say it back. But she never did. Not once. All I ever got were her sharp words and colder looks. You're too slow. You talk too much. You think you're better than everyone. Every compliment from others seemed to irritate her, as if my success was her failure. Growing up in our home was like living in a silent war. My father kept peace by staying quiet. He would sit in his chair, reading the newspaper, pretending not to hear the arguments. Whenever I looked at him for help, he'd just sigh and say, "She means well," but I knew better. Love doesn't sound like that, even as a child. I could feel something broken between us, something that didn't belong to me, but that I was forced to carry. I remember overhearing her once when I was about 10. She was shouting at my father behind a closed door. You think this child will fix anything? I never wanted this life, this responsibility. Her voice cracked. I didn't understand it then, but now it made sense. My mother wasn't angry at me. Not really. She was angry at her life, her lost dreams, her pain. I was just the nearest target. Still, knowing that didn't make it hurt less. As I walked that night, I found myself passing the small church I used to visit before exams. The lights inside were still on. I went in and sat at the back, staring at the flickering candles. The silence pressed around me, heavy but strangely comforting. For the first time in my life, I prayed not for success, not for approval but for strength. God, I whispered, if I'm really not meant to be loved, then give me a reason to stay alive anyway. The wind outside howled softly against the church doors, and in that stillness, something inside me shifted, not healed, but awakened. The next morning, sunlight crept through my window, but it felt like a stranger's touch. I hadn't slept all night, my eyes burned, my mind replaying her words like a cursed echo. I kept asking myself the same question: why was I born just to be hated by the one person meant to love me most? As I packed my graduation robe into the closet, a small piece of paper fell out from one of the pockets. It was the note I had written weeks ago, a short speech I'd planned to read to my mom and dad that night. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Dear Mama and Papa," it said, "thank you for never giving up on me. Every day, I tried to be the child you could be proud of. I hope I've finally made you smile." My throat tightened. The irony was cruel. The letter was filled with gratitude, love, and hope, and yet, the person it was meant for had given me nothing but rejection. I crumpled it up, then stopped halfway. Instead of throwing it away, I tucked it into my wallet. It felt like the last proof of the person I used to be, the one who still believed love could be earned. Later that day, I sat outside on the front steps of our house, watching my father wash the car. He didn't say anything about last night, neither did I. The silence between us was thick and heavy, full of words neither of us had the courage to speak. Finally, I broke it. "Why didn't you stop her?" I asked. He froze for a moment, then sighed. "You know your mother's temper," he said quietly. "She doesn't mean everything she says." I laughed bitterly. "You heard her, Dad. She said she wished I was never born. How do you not mean that?" He looked away, shame flickering in his eyes. "She's been through a lot. You wouldn't understand." That sentence hit me even harder than my mother's words. You wouldn't understand. That's what everyone said when they didn't want to face the truth. I stood up, brushing the dust from my jeans. "You're right," I said. "I don't understand. And I don't think I ever will." I walked away before he could answer. As I passed through the gate, I saw my mother through the living room window. She was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, as if nothing had happened. Not a flicker of guilt, not a single glance in my direction. In that moment, something inside me hardened. The pain didn't disappear, but it turned into something sharper: resolve. If they truly wished I was never born, then maybe it was time I lived like I didn't belong here. That night, I made up my mind. I packed a small bag, a few clothes, my passport, my graduation certificate. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I had to leave. For once, I wasn't running away from pain. I was walking toward freedom. The bus station smelled of diesel and old rain. People moved around me, dragging suitcases, shouting, laughing, all of them heading somewhere, belonging somewhere. I stood there with one small bag and a heart that felt heavier than the world. I bought a one-way ticket to a city I'd never seen before. I didn't even check the map. I just wanted distance miles between me and the words that had shattered me. As the bus roared to life, I looked out of the window and saw my reflection against the fading skyline of my hometown. My chest tightened. I whispered to myself, maybe she'll notice I'm gone. But deep down, I already knew she wouldn't. Hours passed in silence. The bus rumbled through dark roads and sleeping villages. I kept thinking about everything: my childhood, the laughter I used to fake, the moments I tried to hug her and felt her body stiffen like I was a stranger. I wondered what kind of mother dreams of a child, and then regrets it once that dream comes true. When we reached the next city, dawn was just beginning to break. The sky was soft pink, the streets nearly empty. I stepped off the bus and inhaled the new air, sharp, unfamiliar, but free. I found a small hostel near the station. The room was barely big enough for the bed, but it was quiet. For the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It comforted me. I placed my graduation certificate on the table and stared at it. That paper, which had meant everything to me yesterday, now felt like a symbol of everything I had lost. But somewhere inside me, a tiny spark still burned. A voice whispered, "This isn't the end." I started looking for small jobs the next day. I waited tables, cleaned offices, carried boxes at the market. The money was little, but every coin I earned on my own felt like a victory. No one here knew my story. No one looked at me with disappointment or pity. I could be anyone, even someone worthy. One evening, after a long shift at a cafe, I sat on a park bench eating roasted corn from a street vendor. An old woman sat beside me. She was humming softly, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap. "You look lost, child," she said suddenly, her accent thick and warm. I smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." She nodded slowly. "Then keep walking until you find yourself. Even broken things can shine again." I didn't know why, but her words hit something deep inside me. That night, As I lay in my small room, I decided I wasn't going to live as someone unwanted anymore. I was going to create a life that proved I was meant to exist, no matter who wished otherwise. And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Slowly, I began to build a version of myself that my old life would never have allowed. I found a steady job at a bookstore downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt safe. The smell of books, the quiet hum of readers, the rhythm of turning pages. It became my healing place. I started writing in a journal every night, pouring out everything I had buried for years. At first, it was anger, raw and unfiltered. I wrote about the dinner, her words, the silence, the ache that wouldn't fade. But over time, the pages softened. The rage turned into reflection. I began to see my mother not just as a monster, but as a woman broken by her own story. Sometimes, I'd pause mid-sentence and wonder what her childhood was like. Did anyone ever tell her she was enough? Did she ever feel loved? Or was she only repeating the pain that had been handed to her? One evening, I stayed late at the bookstore to close up. A little girl came in with her mother, the kind of pair that looked like sunshine. The girl tugged at her mother's hand, pointing at a shelf. "Mommy, this one," she said, smiling. The woman bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Good choice, my love." That simple scene broke me a little. I turned away so they wouldn't see the tears forming in my eyes. It wasn't jealousy, it was realization. Love could look like that. Gentle, effortless, real. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I can't change my mother's love, but I can learn to love myself differently." The next morning, I decided to do something bold, something that terrified me. I enrolled in evening classes to study psychology. I wanted to understand pain, healing, and why some wounds last longer than others. Maybe, if I could understand people like her, I could finally forgive her and myself. My life began to take shape. I made friends, people who saw me for who I was, not what my family had said I was. On weekends, I volunteered at a youth center, helping kids from broken homes with school. Their stories mirrored mine, children searching for approval, parents too damaged to give it. But when they smiled, when they said thank you, I felt something heal in me, piece by piece. Then, one evening, as I was leaving class, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The message was short, only a few words, but it made my knees go weak. "Your mother is sick. She's asking for you." I stared at the screen, frozen. After all these years, after all that silence, why now? I didn't know what I felt. Anger, fear, pity, maybe all of them at once. I sat there in the dark classroom, gripping my phone tightly, my heart pounding with confusion. I had left to escape her, but now, fate was calling me back. ORDS. The train ride back home felt like moving through time. Every station passed pulled me closer to the memories I had buried. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, the kind that promised rain, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for the story to end. I hadn't spoken to my parents in years. I had built a new life, far from their voices, far from the place where my pain had been born. Yet here I was, holding a small suitcase again, my heart trembling like the night I had first left. When I reached the town, everything looked smaller. The houses, the streets, even the people. It was as if time had shrunk the world I once thought was too big for me. I walked slowly toward our old home, the same cracked gate, the same dusty front yard, the same tree that once held my childhood dreams. My father opened the door. He looked older, his hair now gray, his shoulders slouched under invisible weight. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "She's been asking for you." I followed him through the quiet house. The walls still carried the same family photos, smiling faces that hid too many secrets. The smell of camphor and medicine filled the air. When we entered her room, I almost didn't recognize her. My mother was lying on the bed, frail and small, her skin pale, her eyes half closed. The woman who once commanded rooms with her voice now looked like a shadow of herself. She turned her head slowly, and when her eyes met mine, something in them flickered, surprise, guilt, maybe even love. "You came," she said weakly. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. My father quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. The silence between us was thick, years of pain hanging like smoke. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice trembling. "I was cruel to you." My throat tightened. "You told me you wished I was never born." Tears welled in her eyes. "I know, and I've hated myself every day for it." She coughed, her hands shaking. "I wasn't ready to be a mother. I didn't know how to love. My own mother never loved me either." Her words broke something inside me, not anger, but sadness. The kind of sadness that comes when you finally understand the monster wasn't born evil. It was made by pain. She reached out her hand, thin and trembling. Can you forgive me? I stared at her hand for a long time. Part of me wanted to pull away, but another part, the part that had healed, grown, and found peace, reached forward and held it gently. I already did, I said softly, a long time ago. A tear rolled down her cheek. She smiled faintly, then closed her eyes as if a burden had finally lifted. In that moment, I didn't feel like her unwanted child anymore. I felt like her redemption. The funeral was quiet. Only a few relatives came, most of them distant cousins who whispered more than they prayed. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and wilted flowers as the priest recited his final words. I stood a few feet from the grave, watching the coffin disappear into the ground, feeling a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't the peace that comes from joy, it was the peace that follows understanding. For years, I had carried anger like a second skin, but now, standing there, I felt something leave me a heavy, invisible weight I had carried since childhood. My father stood beside me, silent as always. When the crowd began to drift away, he finally spoke, his voice low and tired. She used to read your letters, you know, he said. I turned to him, surprised. What letters? The ones you sent during your first year away, he replied. She never answered them, but she kept them in a box under her bed. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had written those letters every week, hoping one day she would reply, telling her about my new city, my job, how I was learning to cook, how I missed her even when I swore I didn't. Knowing she had read them, that she'd kept them, was like finding a piece of love hidden in ashes. After the burial, I stayed behind when everyone left. I knelt beside the grave and ran my fingers through the fresh soil. You hurt me more than anyone, I whispered, but you also taught me what love shouldn't be. I forgive you, Mama. I hope wherever you are, you finally found peace. The sun broke through the clouds for a brief moment, lighting the tombstone. I took it as a sign, a quiet nod from the universe. That evening, back in the city, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my small desk, staring at a blank page in my journal. My mind replayed every moment. The dinner, the pain, the departure, and the return. But this time, the story didn't feel tragic. It felt complete, so I began to write, not for her, not for revenge, but for the countless others who had lived through the same silent heartbreak. I poured out my soul into words, turning pain into purpose. I wrote about generational wounds, about broken mothers and lost children, about finding light even when you're told you don't deserve to exist. I wrote until the first rays of dawn crept through the window. Months later, my story was published online under a small tag, #AfricanTales. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but they did, thousands of them. People from across the world sent messages. This is my story too. You made me cry. You made me forgive. That was when I realized something powerful. My mother's words had once destroyed me, but they had also birthed a writer, a healer, a voice for others who had been silenced. The world moved differently after that. My pain, once a private wound, had become something bigger, a message, a movement. Every time I opened my inbox, there were new stories waiting. Children who had been told they were mistakes. Mothers who confessed their regrets. Fathers who wanted to learn how to love better. My story had become a mirror where others could finally see themselves. With the little savings I had, and the help of a few friends from the youth center, I decided to start something real, a foundation. I called it the Unborn Project. The name came to me one night while reading an old proverb that said, "The child who is not loved will rebuild the world to feel love." The foundation's mission was simple: to support young people from broken homes, to help them find emotional healing and education. We started small, just a few volunteers, a single rented room, and secondhand books. But soon, it grew. People began donating, sharing, volunteering. The same pain that once isolated me now connected me to hundreds of souls who had lived through their own storms. I spent my days mentoring teenagers who felt unseen, listening to stories that sounded too familiar. Every time I looked into their eyes, I saw my younger self scared, desperate to be enough. And every time I spoke to them, I imagined speaking to her, my mother. "Your worth isn't measured by anyone's approval," I told them. "The fact that you exist means you matter." One day, a journalist came to interview me for an article about the Unborn Project. During the interview, she asked softly, "If your mother could see you now, what would you say to her?" I smiled, not the bitter smile of the past, but one full of quiet strength. "I'd tell her thank you," I said. "She taught me what pain feels like, and because of that, I learned how to heal others. She wished I was never born, but because I was, others have found reasons to live." The journalist paused, tears in her eyes. "That's powerful," she whispered. Later that evening, as I walked home, the sunset painted the sky in gold and crimson, colors of endings and beginnings. I stopped for a moment, watching the light fade behind the horizon. The wind brushed my face gently, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of my past. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Mama, I'm okay." In that moment, it felt as though the air itself replied, a quiet peace settling over me like a blessing. I had become everything they said I couldn't be. Not out of revenge, but out of love, love for the broken, love for myself, love for life. And as the night embraced the city, I knew the story was no longer just mine. It was a tale for every heart that had ever been told, "You shouldn't have been born." Because sometimes, the most unwanted lives become the ones that change the world.